Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a burned-out federal auditor seeks peace in a remote Virginia home, he finds himself the target of a rogue HOA's obsessive crusade for control. But they picked the wrong man. What begins as harassment spirals into forged documents, lies, and all-out suburban war. When I left D.C., I promised myself two things. I'd never wear a suit unless someone was getting buried or married, and I'd never again deal with bureaucratic power trips. After 15 years as a federal auditor, sniffing out embezzlement under the clean carpets of government offices, I'd had enough. So I bought a place where I could breathe. 11 acres of forest-wrapped solitude in rural Virginia. A two-story colonial revival that had seen better centuries. A half-collapsing barn I planned to turn into an office, and a front porch that creaked like it was proud to still exist. The air was clean. The neighbors were distant, which I counted as a bonus. The real estate agent had said the same thing at least twice during closing. This parcel is not, I repeat, not under the jurisdiction of the Maple Bridge Preserve HOA. It was specifically excluded in a 2008 boundary case. That's why I bought it. That, and the fact that the nearest Starbucks was 15 minutes away. Bliss. For the first week, everything was perfect. I spent my mornings drinking coffee on the porch with a view of deer and fog. Evenings, I worked on restoring the fencing around the southern edge, just for visual integrity, not because I thought anyone would come wandering through the woods. But by day 8, things got weird. It started with a glossy envelope stuffed into my mailbox. No postage, no return address, just a silver HOA logo on the front, like it was a wedding invitation. Inside was a welcome letter from the Maple Bridge Preserve Homeowners Association. It congratulated me on my recent integration into the community and included a breakdown of monthly dues, $1,200. A schedule of fines for violations like non-neutral vehicle color and exterior design non-compliance. A mandatory appearance date for the upcoming civic beautification meeting. I laughed, out loud. It echoed off the pines. I tossed the packet into the burn barrel with some moldy cardboard and figured it was a clerical mistake. Maybe they didn't get the memo that my lot was its own sovereign damnation. I made a mental note to follow up with the county just to shut it down officially. 2 days later, it got less funny. I was tightening the north fence post when I noticed a man with a clipboard and a camera on my driveway. Late 50s, HOA polo shirt, that look people get when they've memorized a policy manual and think it makes them dangerous. He was snapping photos of my truck, a blue 79th Ford that had survived 2 divorces and 1 electrical fire, and muttering about non-regulation finishes. I walked up, gloves on, hammer still in hand. "You lost?" He didn't even flinch. "Just documenting a few things. Your vehicle color's out of compliance. The board prefers muted community-conscious palettes." "Right," I said, smiling politely. "And I prefer strangers not trespassing on my land. See the fence? You're inside it. You're leaving now." He hesitated like he wasn't used to being told no, without a meeting and a motion. Then he walked off, slow, like he wanted me to feel the weight of his moral disappointment. The next morning, I found myself face to face with Karen. You know the type. 60-something, skin pulled tighter than a drum, pastel pantsuit that looked both expensive and haunted, and a voice like a turned-down NPR host. She knocked twice, sharp and deliberate. I opened the door, coffee in hand, and she smiled like we were old friends. "Good morning, Mr. Danton. Karen Drowell, president of the Maple Bridge Preserve Homeowners Association." I waited. She held out a stamped envelope. "Just following up on our welcome package. You may not have realized, but the board voted last quarter to annex bordering parcels, yours included." "Annexed," I repeated. She nodded. "Yes. Community coherence, environmental uniformity, and developmental integrity. Very standard. Your home now enjoys the full benefits of our community." I opened the envelope. Inside was a record of inclusion with an embossed seal but no owner signature, just a blank line that read, "Property owner consent. NA, board authority invoked." "Karen," I said calmly, "this land was excluded from your HOA 15 years ago. I have the deed and the ruling." Her smile stayed on, but it went dead in the eyes. Sometimes policies evolve faster than paperwork. That's not how real estate law works. "Well," she said, stepping back, "I'm sure we'll clear it up." But in the meantime, I'd encourage you to avoid any non-compliant exterior work. The community notices everything. She left the way she came, like royalty inspecting a rebellious province. I stood there for a long moment, letter in one hand, mug in the other. Then I went inside, pulled the old files from escrow, and called the county records office. 5 hours later, I had confirmation. My property had never been, and legally could not be, absorbed by the HOA. And the best part, the previous owner had sued them for trying this exact stunt 15 years ago. And won. Their charter had been explicitly amended to exclude this lot. My lot. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a repeat attempt. A hostile one. This wasn't paperwork confusion. This was the beginning of a siege. The morning after I confirmed with the county that Maple Bridge Preserve had about as much authority over my land as I did over the moon, I decided to make things painfully, physically clear. I started rebuilding the perimeter fence. The old posts were crooked, some had rotted through, and the back stretch near the tree line looked like a drunk bear had used it for a back scratcher. It wasn't technically necessary, the property lines were already defined by survey stakes, but I figured a visible boundary would do two things. 1. Keep the wildlife where it belonged. 2. Keep the HOA wildlife where they belonged. I spent the better part of the day digging post holes, leveling beams, and arguing with a stubborn auger that kept trying to veer toward every buried rock in Virginia. Around mid-afternoon, I heard the crunch of gravel under tires. I looked up expecting the lumber delivery truck. Nope. A white SUV with Maple Bridge Preserve HOA, Community Integrity Patrol, stenciled on the door, rolled to a smug stop in my driveway. I watched 3 people climb out, all wearing matching khaki uniforms and looks that said their weekends were dedicated to ruining someone else's. They approached like they were serving a warrant. The leader, bald, sunburned, wearing sunglasses even though we were standing under shade, spoke first. "Afternoon, sir. We received notice of unapproved exterior modifications taking place at this residence." I leaned on my shovel. "This residence is not part of your HOA. You're trespassing." "We have documentation," he said, patting a binder like it was a holy scripture. "Your property was annexed by board authority." "And I have county records," I replied, saying that's a fairy tale. He didn't like that. His mouth twitched. He glanced back at the SUV, where someone was already snapping photos of my fence and, for some reason, my face. "Sir," he said, adopting the tone of a dentist about to deliver news about root canals, "until this is resolved, you're still required to comply with community standards. I'm not required to comply with anything you people print on decorative letterhead. Now leave. We need to assess the structure. You can assess your ass right back into that SUV." The woman with him gasped like I'd slapped her with the Constitution. The bald one squared his shoulders, clearly not used to resistance from a single homeowner with a shovel. "We're documenting a violation of—" I didn't let him finish. I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line and reported trespassers claiming false authority. The deputy on the other end sighed like it was the 3rd such call that week. He said someone would stop by. That should have been the end of it. But Karen wasn't done. The next day, I was in the southern field repairing the wire fencing when I heard shouting at the front of the property. I walked up the hill and saw 2 of the HOA rangers corralling my hired contractors like cattle dogs, waving papers in their faces. The workers looked confused and more than a little scared. The HOA people were barking threats about unauthorized construction and massive fines. Before I could even holler, Karen herself strutted out from behind a hedge like she'd been waiting. For her cue, pastel pantsuit again, this one the color of dying lavender. She pointed at my workers and yelled, "Stop all work. This is a violation of community code." I climbed the last few feet up the rise and said, "Karen, I told you yesterday. This isn't your jurisdiction." She turned, eyes bright with the kind of zeal you usually see in people who get banned from Facebook for medical misinformation. "Mr. Danton, you were warned. You cannot simply ignore the democratic decisions of this community." "I'm not in your community." "You are within its spirit," she snapped. I laughed. A short, sharp, completely involuntary laugh that made her nostrils flare. Then she did something I did not expect. She pulled out her phone, dialed 911, and started screaming. Actually screaming way that an armed man is threatening HOA officials and destroying community property. For a few seconds, I just stared at her, stunned, while my contractors froze like deer staring at a fast-approaching lawsuit. Karen kept yelling into the phone, describing me, describing my supposedly brandished firearm, describing the fence posts as community assets under attack. I glanced down at my belt. The only thing hanging from it was a measuring tape. But that didn't matter. A false emergency call is still an emergency call. 2 sheriff's cruisers tore up my driveway within minutes, lights flashing, deputies jumping out with hands near their holsters. My workers immediately threw their hands up like they were auditioning for a hostage scene. The HOA patrol suddenly looked very interested in the clouds. I stepped forward slowly, palms open. Officers, I want to state clearly, I am unarmed. This is my property. These people have... Keep your hands visible, one deputy ordered. Not aggressive, just standard procedure. I complied, recounting the situation with a clarity I'd perfected during 15 years of federal audits. Calm, precise, and absolutely done with everyone's shit. The deputies checked my identification, checked my permit, and checked my truck. No weapon, no threat, no destroyed community property, unless you count the HOA's dignity lying in fragments on the ground. What exactly is going on here? The deputy asked Karen. She launched into a dramatic retelling that would have made a telenovela jealous. Wild hand gestures, trembling voice, the whole performance. The deputies listened in stony silence. When she finally finished, one of them said, "Ma'am, everything you just described is either disproven or outside your authority. This land is not part of your HOA." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish encountering an unexpected philosophical dilemma. Furthermore, the deputy added, "A false emergency report is a crime. We'll be filing a report." Karen's face froze in a rictus of disbelief. The deputies told my workers they were clear to continue and told the HOA patrol to vacate the property. One of them muttered something about paper tyrants as they got back into their SUV. When everyone was gone, I stood alone in the yard for a moment, letting the quiet sink in. Birds chirped. The wind rustled the pines. Then I said to myself, "Okay, so that's how they want to play this." And I went back to work on my fence. I'd barely finished painting the last fence post when the next attack landed. This time, it came with a knock at the door and a dead-eyed manila envelope from a process server who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. He mumbled something that sounded like an apology and walked off before I could ask which planet he'd just launched this from. Inside was a civil complaint from the Maple Bridge Preserve Homeowners Association. They were suing me for $12,300. The breakdown was as deranged as it was creative. Unpaid HOA dues, retroactive to the 2021 board resolution, fines for vehicular aesthetic violations, penalties for refusal to participate in mandatory civic events, and this one really got me. A breach of community spirit through non-compliance with integration protocols. I don't think I've laughed that hard since a congressman tried to bribe me with Bitcoin. Attached to the complaint was a supplemental exhibit packet. Exhibit A, a color-coded map showing my parcel, now mysteriously labeled Lot 171A, outlined in red like some kind of threat. A note beside it read, "Incorporated by Resolution MBP." Exhibit B, a one-page document titled Consent to HOA Inclusion, allegedly signed by me. Except it wasn't. Not in any legal sense. The signature looked like someone had studied my name on a mailbox and traced it after 3 drinks. There were no witnesses, no date stamp, and no reference to the actual property deed. It might as well have been signed Mickey Mouse. But they filed it, in court, as evidence. I didn't panic. I worked in federal litigation long enough to know the smell of desperation covered in legalese. But I also knew better than to assume a court would magically see through bullshit without help. So I shifted gears. No more casual brush-offs or polite rebuttals. It was time for a response measured in paperwork and precision. First stop, I called the previous owner of the property, one Walter Gaines. Retired contractor, Vietnam vet, lived down in Roanoke now. Walter didn't just remember the HOA, he hated them. "Those vultures tried the same crap on me back in '08, he grunted over the phone. Took them to court and pinned their smug little charter to the damn wall. Judge ruled they couldn't so much as wave at this lot without my consent. I've still got the paperwork somewhere if you need it." I told him I needed it yesterday. Next, I hired a document examiner, a forensic expert who'd once worked for the IRS and looked like she could spot a forged signature from the moon. I overnighted her the supposed consent form, and she got back to me in 2 days with a formal report. "It's fraudulent," she said bluntly. Cut and paste header, ink inconsistencies, forged signature with hesitation marks and 2 trace overlays. Amateurs. Bad ones. Music to my ears. Third move. I retained an attorney, real estate and civil litigator with a reputation for scalping HOAs. Her name was Vanessa Chung, and her first words to me were, "I love a good HOA takedown. Let's make them regret law school." Together we drafted the response: a countersuit for defamation, document fraud, civil harassment, attempted property theft, and filing a knowingly false emergency report. We didn't just deny their complaint, we nuked it from orbit. Vanessa also filed a motion for expedited discovery. If they wanted to play dirty, we were going to dig through every electronic paper trail, every board meeting email, every memo dripping with HOA venom. It wouldn't be enough to beat them. We were going to expose them. The judge scheduled an initial hearing 2 weeks out. No temporary injunctions granted. The HOA had asked for an emergency order to suspend hostile exterior modifications, meaning, presumably, my fence, but the judge rejected it outright. "This court will not enforce jurisdiction that has not been established," he said, and I could swear Vanessa smirked hard enough to crack enamel. Back home, I opened a bottle of whiskey, sat on my porch, and looked out at my land. My fence stood tall and unapologetic, the grass a little wild, the barn half rotted but proud. I knew this was just the beginning, but now I wasn't just defending property. I was going to make damn sure that every HOA bully who ever abused a resident for a mailbox color thought twice before pulling this stunt again. And I had just started digging. It was just past midnight when I noticed the light. I was in the kitchen halfway through an overcooked grilled cheese and a lukewarm beer when a thin yellow glow flickered against the trees beyond the barn. My property stretched far, and the barn sat tucked behind the tree line where no light should have been, unless something or someone was in there. I set the plate down, grabbed my flashlight, and walked out back. I kept my movements quiet, deliberate. No need to overreact, yet. My sidearm stayed in the lockbox inside. I'd already learned that the second you introduce a gun into any story involving an HOA, you're suddenly a headline waiting to happen. As I approached the barn, I heard soft footsteps and the rustle of something plastic, a tarp, or maybe a trash bag. I opened the door with one hand and aimed the flashlight with the other. The beam caught a man in his 30s crouched by the far wall, holding what looked like a GoPro. "Don't move," I said, loud enough to carry. "Hands up." He blinked, dropped the camera, and bolted past me, but not before I caught a good look at his HOA windbreaker, emblazoned on the back in bold serif. Neighborhood Standards Team. I didn't chase him. Instead, I called the sheriff. When the deputy arrived 20 minutes later, I showed him the footage from my own cameras, which, unlike the HOA's budget espionage, were positioned legally and actually worked. We had clear visuals of the guy entering the barn from the tree line. No permission, no warrant, no nothing. "He say what he was doing here?" the deputy asked. Didn't stick around long enough to chat. I filed a report for criminal trespass, and the next day, the sheriff's department picked him up. His name was Brian Welch, a Maple Bridge volunteer enforcer, whatever that means. According to the arrest report, he claimed he was inspecting for vermin risk, a duty he described as informal but necessary. The sheriff described it as bullshit with a flashlight, but that was only the beginning. Within 48 hours of Welch's arrest, a video started circulating online. It showed me yelling into the darkness, voice raised, flashlight shaking, and, according to the narrator, threatening unarmed community volunteers with a firearm, except I never pulled a gun, never even had one on me. The video was dark, grainy, but it had been edited. My voice had been clipped mid-sentence, and a sound effect, a suspicious click, like a weapon chambering a round, had been inserted. The whole thing was spliced together to look like I was unstable, aggressive, maybe even dangerous. The video came from a new HOA account on a neighborhood app called Community Hub. The caption read, "This is the man rejecting our peaceful efforts to keep Maple Bridge safe. Is this who you want next door to your children?" The comments were predictably rabid. Half the people were calling for police intervention. The other half wanted to form a safety committee. One charming neighbor suggested I be placed on a watch list. I'd dealt with frauds, bureaucrats, and thieves, but this was something else. This was character assassination by PowerPoint. Luckily, I still had the originals. My cameras, motion-activated, infrared, and crystal clear, told the real story. No gun, no threats, no madness. Just one man protecting his damn barn from HOA-sponsored burglars. I called Vanessa, my attorney, and she whistled through her teeth when I sent her the links. They're getting desperate, she said, and sloppy. Isn't this defamation? I asked. Oh, honey, she said. This is a lawsuit wearing a trench coat full of other lawsuits. We filed an emergency cease and desist, a digital takedown notice under the DMCA, and a motion to include this stunt in the countersuit. Vanessa was building the case like a Jenga tower made of TNT. Then things escalated again. That Friday night, I saw movement on my rear cameras, 2 figures sneaking along the fence line near the woods, teenagers, maybe 16 or 17, dressed in dark hoodies, carrying flashlights. One of them had what looked like a metal pipe. They crawled under the edge of the newly built southern fence. I didn't grab a gun. I grabbed the phone. I called the sheriff and said calmly, "There are 2 unknown individuals trespassing on my land, possibly armed." This time, 3 cruisers arrived. The teens were caught near the tool shed, trying to pry open the lock. When questioned, one of them broke quickly. "We thought it was like a prank," he mumbled. "We got a note, said to test the response level. Said if he flips, call 911. "Who gave you the note?" the deputy asked. The kid hesitated, then said, "Karen, something. HOA lady." She said it was part of a security check. They arrested both of them for attempted burglary and trespassing. I sent Vanessa the entire incident report before the ink dried. The next morning, someone tried to log into my email. I got the alert at 5:47 a.m. Unusual sign-in attempt detected. IP address traced to Fairfax. VPN, sure, but sloppy. The only email they'd had access to? The one tied to my court correspondence. I changed my password, enabled hardware 2FA, and forwarded the activity log to Vanessa. She called me an hour later. "They're hacking you now." Apparently, community integrity means cybercrime. We were past neighborhood drama now. This wasn't just about a fence or dues. This was a coordinated, malicious campaign to ruin my name, steal my property, and bury me in enough fear to make me fold. But I had no intention of folding. They'd lit a fire. I was going to let it burn them down. I was in the middle of drafting a reply to Vanessa when I noticed something strange. My inbox was missing a few threads, the kind of emails I knew had been there. One was from the county clerk confirming the upcoming court date. Another was from Vanessa's office with attached affidavits for our countersuit. All gone. At first, I thought I'd misplaced them, maybe archived by mistake. But after checking every folder and spam trap I had, it became clear. They weren't just missing. They'd been deleted, selectively. That's when I remembered the login alert from 3 nights ago. The one I almost dismissed after enabling 2-factor authentication, an unusual sign-in attempt from somewhere near Fairfax. I had assumed it was just someone trying a weak password combo. But now it felt a hell of a lot more deliberate. I called Vanessa. "They're in my email," I told her. "How do you know?" "Missing court notifications, critical files gone, no trace in the trash folder, just vanished." Vanessa didn't hesitate. "Send me everything. Access logs. Device activity. If they're trying to ghost you from your own lawsuit, we escalate fast." Then I called a friend of mine from my federal audit days, tech guy named Darren, who now worked freelance cyber forensics. Brilliant, cynical, addicted to Red Bull and revenge. I told him what happened. He showed up the same evening with a beat-up ThinkPad, 3 USB sticks, and the kind of focus that usually comes right before a congressional hearing. Within an hour, Darren confirmed my paranoia. Someone had logged into my Gmail account using a browser in stealth mode, scraped recent legal threads, and deleted specific messages. Not a full wipe, just enough to cause confusion. Worse, they had tried, and failed, to forward some of the threads to an external address, a private relay tied to a domain called maplebridgedocs.com. "Not even subtle," Darren muttered. "This is rookie-level espionage. HOA's got a nerd on staff who thinks he's Edward Snowden. You can trace it." Already did. The IP linked back to a residential subnet in Alexandria, the same area where, coincidentally, the Maple Bridge Preserve HOA had their administrative annex. We pulled up cached DNS logs, packet timestamps, and browser agent strings. It was a full-blown hack attempt dressed up like a forgotten login. Darren compiled the data into a neat report. 90 pages, signed, time-stamped, and formatted for the cybercrimes unit. Vanessa nearly cackled when I sent it. "We're filing this under attempted obstruction of justice and digital interference," she said. "And we're forwarding it to the Virginia State Bar and the Office of the Inspector General. Think they'll take it seriously?" "Kid, she said. "They tried to digitally erase your access to court. That's not HOA antics anymore. That's federal territory." Meanwhile, HOA was doubling down in public. Their official Community Integrity Bulletin, a thinly veiled smear newsletter they circulated like propaganda flyers, published a blurb about legal delays and non-participating residents attempting to weaponize the judicial system. Subtle. They wanted the neighborhood to believe I was avoiding court because I had something to hide, but they were the ones hiding behind fake domains, forged documents, and digital sabotage. Vanessa filed a motion with the court demanding protective orders for all future communications, physical copies only, delivered by certified courier. She also requested a forensic review of the HOA's systems, under suspicion of criminal activity by its officers. The judge granted the motion and added a personal note. The court is concerned by the pattern of misrepresentation and potential tampering involved. This case will be treated with elevated scrutiny. The HOA's attorneys, led by the ever-smirking Meredith Housley, tried to object, of course, but their arguments were made of soup. At this point, the story had started to leak. A legal blog picked it up, then a local journalist, then a national HOA watchdog group published an exposé titled "When Community Associations Go Rogue, the Danton Case." And just like that, it stopped being a private war. It became a public one. I wasn't just defending my property anymore. I was standing between a corrupted system and every quiet homeowner it had steamrolled into silence. The false calls, the doctored videos, the fake annexation, the hacking. It wasn't just harassment. It was a campaign, and I was going to dismantle it, bite by bite, brick by brick. I wore a plain black suit to court, no tie, just enough to say I respected the venue, not the circus that brought me here. The Maple County Courthouse looked like it hadn't been remodeled since Eisenhower was president. Wood paneling, humming fluorescents, and a faint smell of old coffee and older despair. I sat at the respondent's table next to Vanessa, who looked like she was ready to auction someone's spine. Across from us sat Karen, perched like a vulture in pearls, and her personal mouthpiece, Meredith Housley, a woman whose smile could curdle milk. The room filled up faster than I expected. A few reporters, HOA residents I didn't recognize. One guy in a "HOAs are domestic terrorism" t-shirt, which earned him a warning from the bailiff. Apparently, word had spread. The judge, a no-nonsense middle-aged man with the haircut of someone who hated drama, entered, banged the gavel, and began. HOA was up first. Housley went in swinging. She opened with dramatic language about community cohesion, derelict appearance, and Mr. Danton's refusal to participate in shared obligations vital to neighborhood integrity. She presented the infamous consent to HOA inclusion form, the same one with the forged signature and fabricated resolution, like it was the Magna Carta. Then came the kicker, Exhibit C, a copy of the video footage that had circulated online. You know the one, dark, shaky, spliced together to make me look like Rambo on a caffeine bender. They claimed it showed a pattern of dangerous antisocial behavior, including the threatening of a teenage neighborhood volunteer with a weapon. The judge paused. Is the alleged weapon visible in this footage? Meredith hesitated. The threat is implied. That's not how evidence works, the judge said flatly. Vanessa rose like a storm front. If it pleases the court, she said, we'll be challenging both the legitimacy and admissibility of the plaintiff's materials on the grounds of forgery, defamation, and digital manipulation. She clicked her laptop. The screen behind her came alive with a split-screen video. HOA's doctored version on one side and my original footage, high-res, uncut, time-stamped, and damning, on the other. The differences were glaring. In my footage, I was calm. No weapon. No yelling, just a man asking why someone was in his barn at midnight with a GoPro. The audio in the HOA's version had been doctored. We even played a spectral analysis clip showing the exact points where audio had been spliced. Furthermore, Vanessa added, clicking again, we have forensic evidence proving that the consent to inclusion form is a forgery. Expert analysis indicates the signature was traced, the ink mismatched, and the document header copied from a 2019 template not in use at the time of its alleged creation. She passed the judge a folder, and lastly, she said, cool as ice, We present evidence of unauthorized access to Mr. Danton's private email accounts by an IP address linked to Maple Bridge Preserve HOA systems with the apparent intent of deleting legal communications related to this case. The judge blinked. You're alleging the plaintiff tampered with the defendant's court participation. We are proving it, Your Honor. We dropped the full cyber forensics report on the table like a dead body. Darren had formatted it perfectly. Time logs, screenshots, DNS traces, even the MAC address of the device used in the login. The judge flipped through it, slowly, grimly. Then he looked up at Karen. Mrs. Drowell, are you aware of any unauthorized access to Mr. Danton's personal accounts? Karen smiled. This all feels very theatrical. I can't possibly speak to what technically inclined volunteers may or may not have done in the interest of communal safety. That was a mistake. Your Honor, Vanessa said, we'd like to request a court order to seize digital records from the HOA's administrative systems, including internal communications between board members. The judge didn't even flinch. Granted. Karen's face cracked. Meredith objected, something about privacy and overreach, but the judge silenced her with one sentence. You opened this door by bringing in falsified materials. Now we're walking through it. Court recessed for the day, but not before the judge made it clear the entire HOA would be under scrutiny. All documentation, all emails, all security logs. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I kept it brief. I bought land to live in peace. They decided to wage war. Now the truth is doing what fences couldn't, keeping the wrong people out. Karen, cornered by a local news crew, hissed that this was a smear campaign by anti-community extremists. Her voice cracked when someone asked if she'd forged legal documents. She didn't answer. She got in her Lexus and peeled out like a teenager skipping detention. That night, Vanessa called me. Guess what they found already? What? A folder on their internal drive labeled Priority Acquisitions. Your name's in there, along with maps, photos of your house, and a list of targeted compliance violations. They had a file on me? Oh, honey, she said. They had a blueprint. The storm broke 2 mornings later. I was halfway through stacking lumber near the barn when I got the call from Vanessa. Her voice had that electric edge, the tone lawyers get when the other side just lit themselves on fire. They raided the HOA office. I nearly dropped a board on my foot. You're serious? Court-ordered seizure of records. County sheriff, 2 tech forensic analysts, and a clerk with a very large evidence box. You won't believe what they found. I want to believe, I said, walking toward the porch. You will. Turns out the HOA's administrative annex, a glorified double-wide tucked behind the community center, was less office, more crime scene. The investigators found a spreadsheet titled Target Parcel Integration Plan with 14 properties, all outside the HOA's jurisdiction, each marked with notes like soft pressure, legal route, or in my case, squeeze out by winter. Copies of multiple consent to HOA inclusion forms, all forged. Some missing signatures, others signed on behalf of owners who had no idea they were members. A folder labeled Compliance Interventions. Photos of my house, license plates, overhead drone shots, even a candid photo of me on the porch with a note, non-compliant. Watch pattern, press harder. Printed emails between Karen and her board discussing adjusting internal documentation retroactively and tightening legal pressure until surrender. A PDF of HOA branded flyers, never distributed, titled, Why Your Neighbor. Might be a danger to the community. My name was in bold. I sat down on the porch swing and exhaled slowly. They had a full campaign planned, Vanessa said, and not just for you. They were trying to expand the HOA through sheer fraud. Realtors know. Not yet, but they will. I already sent a copy to the County Real Estate Ethics Board. By noon, the news had broken. Local affiliates ran segments like Power-Hungry HOA caught forging ownership claims and Whistleblower exposes suburban tyranny. My phone exploded. Friends from my DC days, old audit partners, even my brother in Montana, all of them messaged some version of holy shit, man, and then came the fallout. Brian Welch, the guy caught breaking into my barn, was arrested again, this time for obstruction and conspiracy. He cracked within an hour, claimed Karen pressured him into surveillance work. That she said it was legally gray, but morally necessary. His full statement read like a cult confession. Other board members started distancing themselves fast. One resigned. Another told the press she was unaware of the extent of operations. 2 more went silent, lawyers now speaking for them. But Karen doubled down. She held a press conference from the front steps of her white brick house, standing behind a folding table with a microphone and a desperate smile. Behind her were 2 miserable-looking junior board members and a poorly spelled banner reading "Protect Community Sovereignty." Her statement was a paranoid masterpiece. She called me a corporate plant sent to dismantle democratic neighborhoods, claimed I was working with deep state regulators to weaken local autonomy. At one point, she said I was weaponizing bureaucracy, which, honestly, was the nicest thing anyone had ever accused me of. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't need to, because 24 hours later, the sheriff's office issued a warrant for Karen Drowell's arrest. Charges included forgery of legal documents, conspiracy to defraud property owners, obstruction of justice, false emergency reporting, stalking, and criminal harassment. They arrested her at dawn. Footage hit the evening news. Karen in a robe and pearls, hands cuffed behind her back, trying to yell about sovereignty while being loaded into a squad car. I watched the segment twice. Then I poured myself a bourbon and looked out across my land. Quiet. Whole. Mine. The final court session had all the trappings of a season finale. Packed gallery, press row, whispered bets about sentencing. Karen sat at the defense table in a beige pantsuit that probably cost more than most used cars, looking like she still believed this was all just a misunderstanding, that someone somewhere would bail her out with a golf clap and a community service coupon. Beside her sat Meredith Housley, pale and silent. Her law license had already been suspended pending review, and rumor was the state bar had started preparing the paperwork for disbarment. The judge didn't waste time. He went point by point. Forged documents, coordinated harassment, falsified video materials, fraudulent inclusion notices, hacking into personal accounts, abuse of police emergency systems. He used words like malicious, orchestrated, and, my personal favorite, systematic suburban racketeering. Karen's face barely moved. Until sentencing, 14 years, 4 years for fraud, 3 for document tampering, 2 for criminal harassment, 1 for digital trespass, 2 for conspiracy, and 2 more tacked on for making a false emergency report with intent to manipulate court proceedings. Meredith got 8. No parole for either. When the judge read the last count, Karen didn't even flinch. But when he ordered the complete dissolution of the Maple Bridge Preserve HOA, her jaw finally dropped. The board would be stripped of all authority, funds seized and redistributed to victims via civil restitution, and all properties previously annexed illegally would have their records corrected. It was done. The empire of Xeroxed tyranny was dead. Outside, the courthouse steps turned into a media blitz. HOA horror stories from other neighborhoods started surfacing like cockroaches under a flipped mattress. News vans parked along the county road. A producer from a major network asked if I'd be willing to do a long-form docuseries. I declined. I had other plans. 2 months later, I officially launched HOA Watchdogs, a nonprofit platform for homeowners targeted by rogue HOAs. We published guides, connected people with pro bono legal support, and publicly archived the most egregious abuses, complete with redacted documents and satirical breakdowns written by yours truly. The first case we helped win? A single mother in Arizona whose HOA tried to fine her for installing solar panels. The second? A retiree in Oregon threatened with foreclosure over a non-compliant mailbox post. People were hungry for justice. They just needed someone to light the path. As for my land, it finally settled into peace. No more HOA patrols, no more cameras in the bushes, no more pastel tyrants with forms in triplicate. One Saturday morning, I poured myself a coffee, grabbed a ladder, and bolted a new sign onto the gate at the top of the gravel drive. Simple, honest, unapologetic. Private property, HOA free zone. We don't bow to paper tyrants. A few cars slowed down to read it. One guy honked. I nodded, sipped my coffee, and watched the sun crawl across 11 untouched acres. They tried to annex me with paperwork and paranoia. They forgot who they were dealing with.